Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islamic Audiobooks collection. I will be reading When the Moon Split by Safiur R Mubarakpuri, which we downloaded from kalamullah.com. Let's read. Page 77. Second Migration to Abyssinia. Their prostration at the close of Surah Al-Najm had left the Quraysh looking weak. This loss of strength had to be countered with increased hostility, or people would think they had become convinced of the truth of Muhammad, peace be upon him's message. Therefore, they began to intensify their persecution of the Muslims. Furthermore, the Quraysh were growing jealous of the hospitality the king of Abyssinia had extended to the Muslim immigrants in his country. They resolved to match his kindness to the Muslims with hostility. For reasons of safety, the Prophet, peace be upon him, decided to again have a group of Muslims migrate to Abyssinia. 82 or 83 men and 18 women got themselves ready for the journey. This time, of course, it would not be easy for them to slip past the Quraysh, but they managed to flee Mecca without their enemies noticing. The Quraysh found it difficult to accept the fact that a large group of Muslims had managed to escape their campaign of terror. Safe in Abyssinia, the Muslims now enjoyed the experience of not facing any opposition to their faith and way of life. The Quraysh, nonetheless, had a plan. They sent two of their very shrewd envoys, Amr bin al-As and Abdullah bin Rabi'ah, to Abyssinia to have the Muslims extradited back to Arabia. According to the plan, the two representatives of the Quraysh first met the Abyssinian bishops and bribed them in order to gain access to the king. When they succeeded in getting an audience with him, they presented him with gifts from Arabia. Then they stated their case. O king, some foolish men from our city have taken refuge in your majesty's country. They have abandoned our religion, but rather than accepting your religion, they have invented one of their own. Their families, knowing of their delusions, have sent us to your majesty to bring them back home. When they had made their plea to the king, the Abyssinian bishops stood and urged him to grant their request. The king, however, was a very fair judge. He said that he would allow both parties to make their statements before making a decision. The Muslim refugees were summoned to the king's court. Then the king questioned them why they had entered an unknown religion that had caused them to abandon their families and tribes. Jafar bin Abu Talib, the Prophet, peace be upon him's cousin, rose on behalf of the Muslims and said, O king, we were a nation steeped in ignorance. We worshipped idols, ate carrion, and committed many abominations. We neglected our kin and mistreated our neighbours. The strong among us devoured the weak. We lived thus until Allah raised among us a messenger of whose noble lineage, truthfulness, honesty, and purity we were all aware. He invited us to acknowledge the oneness of God, to worship Allah, and to renounce the stones and idols our forefathers we used to venerate. He enjoined upon us to speak the truth, to keep our word, and to be kind and considerate to our relatives and neighbours. He forbade us to shed blood, to act wantonly, to lie, and to deceive others. He forbade us to encroach upon the property of orphans or to vilify chaste women. He commanded us to worship Allah alone without associating anyone with him. He ordered us to pray, to fast, and to pay the poor their due. We acknowledged he was Allah's messenger and believed in him. We followed him in whatever he brought from Allah, and we worshipped the only one God without associating anything with him. We treated as unlawful what he forbade and embraced what he made lawful for us. At this, our people were estranged. They persecuted us, tried to seduce us from our faith, and force us to return to idolatry, pressing us to return to the abominations we used to commit earlier. When they tortured us, ground us under their tyranny, and stood between us and our religion, we fled to your country, choosing you above others for refuge. We have come here, O king, to your country, seeking your protection. We hope that we shall not be dealt with unjustly. The king listened patiently to Jafar. When he asked Jafar if he could recite something that had been revealed to Muhammad, peace be upon him, Jafar then recited the opening verses of Surah Maryam, named after Mary, the mother of Jesus. The king wept until tears flowed to his beard. and the bishops were also overcome. Truthfully, this and what Jesus brought are from the same divine light. Then turning to the envoys of the Quraysh, the king said, "You may go. By God, I shall never give them to you, nor will they be ill-treated." The two envoys from the Quraysh now changed their tactics. The next day, they returned to the king's court and made another attempt to convince the king to expel the Muslims from his country. Umar tried to incite the king against the Muslims. "O king, they assert a dreadful thing about Jesus, which is too shameful to be repeated before you." The king again summoned the Muslims to his court and questioned them about their belief regarding Jesus. Jafar bin Abi Talib replied, "We say about him that which our Prophet, peace be upon him, has taught us. Jesus was a human being and Allah's prophet. He was a spirit and a word cast unto the Blessed Virgin Maryam." The king took a straw from the ground and said, "By God, Jesus, the son of Mary, does not exceed what you have said by the length of this straw. Go and live in my territory in peace and security. Those who ill-treat you will be punished. I shall not give you any trouble, even if I were offered a mountain of gold in exchange." The king then ordered that all the gifts brought by the envoys from the Quraysh be returned. Having failed miserably, the two envoys left for Arabia in great shame. The Quraysh were very angry about what happened in Abyssinia. They had been mocked in the king's court, and the name of their tribe had been tarnished, all because of a small band of refugees. The Muslims, they determined, would pay for this with their blood. Yet how were they be to avenge for this humiliation? Abu Talib was steadfast in his support for his nephew, no matter how hard the Quraysh tried to manipulate him. With his uncle's protection, the Prophet, peace be upon him, continued with his mission. The Quraysh tried everything to destroy Islam: persecution, assassination, bribery, debate, and even compromise. Nothing worked. The defeat the pagans suffered at the Abyssinian court gave them further cause to hate Islam. Naturally, they took out their frustrations on the Muslims who still lived in Mecca. Once, Utbah bin Abi Lahab, who at this point was divorced from the Prophet, peace be upon him's daughter, Kulthum, came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and quoted a verse from Surah Al-Najm, only to say, "I disbelieve in the one who revealed this verse." He reiterated that although the Quraysh had prostrated along with the Prophet, peace be upon him, after a recitation of this surah, they clung to their disbelief in the divine source of Muhammad, peace be upon him's prophethood, and of the revelations he received. From this point onward, Utbah became a constant source of irritation for the Prophet, peace be upon him. He once tore the Prophet, peace be upon him's clothes and spat in his face. "O Allah," the Prophet, peace be upon him, said in response, "set one of your dogs on him." Soon after that, Utbah went to Syria along with a caravan. When the caravan halted at Zarqa, a lion began to circle him. Utbah panicked and cried, "By God, it will devour me, just as Muhammad, peace be upon him, prayed. I am in Syria and he is in Mecca, but he will still kill me." When they went to sleep that night, the other members of the caravan let Utbah sleep in the middle. Despite this arrangement, the lion passed by the camels and other men and pounced on Utbah. He took his head in its jaws and killed him on the spot. One enemy was vanquished, others remained to plague the Prophet, peace be upon him. Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt, who had placed the camel intestines on the Prophet, peace be upon him's back, once saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, praying, and waited for him to place his forehead on the ground. He then placed his foot on the Prophet, peace be upon him's neck, and pressed down with all his weight until the Prophet, peace be upon him's eyes bulged. Finally, when nothing seemed to deter the Prophet, peace be upon him, from accomplishing his mission, the pagans began to think seriously about assassinating him. They were willing to do this, although it could lead to great bloodshed. Abu Jahl rose before the Quraysh one day and proclaimed, "You all see that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is forever devoted to denouncing our forefathers, calling us ignorant and backward and insulting our gods. Therefore I give my word to Allah that one day I shall lie in wait for him with a heavy stone. When he prostrates, I will crush his head. Following this, you may save me or leave me at the mercy of Banu Abdul Manaf." The people then assured him, "By God, we will never abandon you. Do whatever you like." The people then assured him, "By God, We will never abandon you. Do whatever you like. Abu Jahl was quick to take full advantage of his followers' loyalty. The next morning, he found a heavy stone and waited for his victim to arrive. The Prophet, peace be upon him, came to the Kaaba as usual and began to perform his prayers. Sitting in groups around the Kaaba, the Quraysh eagerly waited for Abu Jahl to carry out his plan. Abu Jahl edged forward to where the Prophet, peace be upon him, stood in prayer. However, just as he was about to close in on his victim, he suddenly turned and fled from the scene. The Quraysh grabbed Abu Jahl and found his face flushed, his eyes vacant, and his hands still gripping the stone. Eventually, he calmed down and released the stone. The Quraysh said, "Abu Hakam, what happened to you?" "I was going to carry out my promise," Abu Jahl explained, "but a camel appeared before me. By God, I have never seen such skull, neck, and teeth, and it was about to devour me." The Prophet, peace be upon him, later said that the vision Abu Jahl saw was actually Jibreel, peace be upon him. Others among the Quraysh, however, were undeterred by Abu Jahl's experience. When a group of Quraysh saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, circumambulating the Kaaba in worship, they began to make loud, satirical remarks about him. Encouraged by the fact that he seemed hurt by these remarks, they insulted him again, a second time, and a third time. Finally, the Prophet, peace be upon him, stopped and facing them said, "O people of Quraysh, do you hear? I swear by the one in whose hands lies my life, I have come to you with a great slaughter." The Prophet's words weighed very heavily on those who had been taunting him. They fell silent for a while and then tried to calm him by speaking kind words to him. The next day, the same group of people assembled at the Kaaba and began talking about the Prophet, peace be upon him. A few moments later, the Prophet, peace be upon him, appeared, and they all rushed towards him in rabid anger. Pulling on his clothes, they asked, "Are you the one who orders us to stop worshipping the gods of our forefathers?" The Prophet, peace be upon him, was not intimidated. "Yes, I am." The mob surrounded him on all sides, and some began pushing and shoving him from side to side, while others shouted out insults. Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt caught hold of a cloth hanging from around his neck and began choking the Prophet, peace be upon him. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, heard the commotion and ran to defend him. He seized Uqba by his shoulders and pulled him off the Prophet, peace be upon him. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, tore each man away from the Prophet, peace be upon him, crying, "Woe to you! Would you kill a man simply because he says that Allah is his Lord?" Now the mob turned on Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, and let the Prophet, peace be upon him, go. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, paid a great price for rescuing the Prophet, peace be upon him. The mob beat him violently, and his face was so battered that his nose was indistinguishable from his face. The people from Abu Taym wrapped him up and took him to his house. They were sure that he would not live to see the next day. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, however, survived the assault. That evening, he asked about the Prophet, peace be upon him. The people of Banu Taym rebuked him for his stubborn loyalty to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and went away. Unconcerned about his own health, Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, refused food and drink, insistent on seeing the Prophet, peace be upon him, to make sure he was alive and well. Finally, in the still darkness, he was taken to the Prophet, peace be upon him, in Dar al-Arqam. There he saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, and only then did he eat and drink. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, suffered more and more at the hands of the Meccan pagans until he decided to migrate to Abyssinia. With this intention, he left Makkah and headed for what had become a place of refuge for Muslims. When he reached Baqimad, he happened to meet Malik bin Dughunna, the leader of Qara and Ahabish. Malik asked him why he had left Makkah. When Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, told him he was migrating to Abyssinia, Malik voiced his disapproval. "A man like you cannot be expelled. You help the destitute. You keep good relations with your family. You bear the burdens of the helpless. You are hospitable with guests, and you comfort those who suffer for the sake of truth. I pledge to protect you. Come along with me and pray to your Lord in your city." Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, accepted Malik's pledge of protection, and both men journeyed back to Makkah. Malik bin Dughunna then announced that Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, was under his protection. The Quraysh accepted his pledge of safety for Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, on a condition that Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, would pray only inside his house so that no one would see him. The pagans feared that their women, children, and more impressionable members would be influenced by such an open show of Islam. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, abided by this stipulation for a while. He later made for himself a prayer area in his courtyard, and where he started praying and reciting the Qur'an in the open. When Ibn Dughunna learned of this, he reminded him of the condition under which he had pledged him safety. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, then released him from his pledge, saying, I am agreeable to the protection and guarantee of my Lord. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, was not only devout, but also tender-hearted. The Qur'an, with its promise of reward and punishment, its description of Allah's creation, and its narratives about previous prophets, moved him to tears. As he recited its verses, Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, would weep. Women and children would crowd around, watching in amazement at this show of emotion over the Qur'an. The men of Quraysh were not able to tolerate this display for long and renewed their resolve to harass him. Not all the Meccans, however, took such a harsh view of Islam. Even the pillars of pagan society found their stony hearts crumbling when in solitude they considered the Prophet, peace be upon him's message. They were no less impressed by his courage in standing up to the Quraysh and his enduring patience. Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Umar bin Khattab, may Allah be pleased with them both, were two such people, and their conversions marked a turning point in the short history of Islam. Once, Abu Jahl happened to pass by the Prophet, peace be upon him, near Mount Safa. He began insulting the Prophet, peace be upon him, and according to some sources, hit him on the head with a stone, causing him to bleed. The Prophet, peace be upon him, ever patient, did not respond to Abu Jahl's harassment. A slave woman who belonged to Abdullah bin Ja'dan witnessed the scene. Satisfied with himself, Abu Jahl went to the Kaaba and sat with a group of men from the Quraysh. Shortly afterwards, Hamza returned from hunting with his bow. When the slave woman told him what had happened to his nephew, Hamza turned on Abu Jahl. You bag of wind, do you dare abuse my nephew when I follow his religion? Hamza struck Abu Jahl's head with his bow and made a gash. Men from Banu Makhzum, Abu Jahl's tribesmen, and Banu Hashim, Hamza's tribesmen, rose against each other until Abu Jahl ordered his relatives to stay put, saying, Let Abu Amara, Hamza, go. I abused his nephew unjustly. Hamza's sudden conversion was obviously the result of a strong sense of family honour. The Prophet had been trying for 6 lonely, difficult years to spread the message of Allah, and Hamza had not given it much thought until then. Soon, however, something began to grow in Hamza's heart. He realized that faith was taking root, and he began to see that his love for Islam went beyond any kinship he had with Muhammad, peace be upon him. His faith in Allah would become so powerful that he would later be called Asadullah, the Lion of Allah. Only 3 days after Hamza's conversion to Islam, Umar became a Muslim. Umar, a tall and powerful man, had been a staunch enemy of the Muslims. He was known for his fierce temper and his love of poetry and strong drink. The story of how Umar embraced Islam is one of the most interesting episodes in the history of Islam. Umar had heard the Prophet, peace be upon him, reciting verses of the Qur'an at the Kaaba, and some of the verses he overheard moved him. However, his heart remained firmly opposed to Islam and the Prophet, peace be upon him. His opposition grew to the point that one day he picked up his sword and decided to kill the Prophet, peace be upon him. Fortunately, Umar did not succeed in carrying out his intention. With his sword gripped in his hand and his mind made up, Umar met Nu'aym bin Abdullah, who asked him, Where are you going? I am going to slay Muhammad, peace be upon him, he replied. How will you save yourself from Banu Hashim and Banu Zuhra? Angered at this question, which seemed like a challenge to him, Umar replied, It seems as if you have forsaken our faith. Umar, Nu'aym countered, the amazing thing is that your sister and brother-in-law have also renounced your faith. Umar was furious, and his attention was diverted from the Prophet, peace be upon him, to his own family. In a rage, he headed straight for his sister's house. At that moment, Khubab bin Arat was at Umar's sister's house, teaching her and her husband Surah Taha. When they heard Umar outside the door, Khubab hid himself, and Fatima, Umar's sister, quickly hid the sheets of paper upon which the Quranic verses were written. "What was that babble I heard?" They could see that Umar was enraged and armed with a sword. "Nothing, we were just talking." "Maybe both of you have renounced your faith," Umar said. Umar's brother-in-law said, "Well, tell me, Umar, what if the truth lies far from your religion?" Umar's response to this question was swift and violent. He pounced upon his brother-in-law and beat him mercilessly. When his sister tried to disengage the two in defense of her husband, Umar hit her hard on the face. Blood ran down her cheek, but at this point Fatima was not to be deterred from speaking the truth. Echoing her husband's question, she challenged the wisdom of Umar's faith. "Umar, what if the truth lies far from your religion?" Then in front of her brother, she declared her own faith, using the same words every Muslim utters as solemn testimony about the oneness of Allah and the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him. She said, "I bear witness that none is worthy of worship other than Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the prophet of Allah." When Umar heard his sister's proud affirmation of her faith, he was overwhelmed with shame. "Show me what you are reading from," he said. His sister retorted, "You are unclean, and only the pure and clean can touch it. Go and wash yourself." A chastened Umar bathed and then took the pages of Surah Taha in his hand and recited Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. "These are pure names," Umar said. He continued reading, "Verily, I am Allah. There is no God but I, so worship me and offer prayers in remembrance of me." Qur'an 20:14. Umar exclaimed in awe at the sublimity of the verses. "Where can I find Muhammad, peace be upon him?" he asked. When Khubab, may Allah be pleased with him, heard this, he came out of hiding and said, "O Umar, rejoiced! I prayed that Allah would bless you. Thursday night I heard the Prophet, peace be upon him, praying to Allah, saying, 'O Allah, strengthen Islam by Umar bin Khattab or Abu Jahl bin Hisham.'" When Umar heard that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was at Darul Al-Qam, he rushed there, hoping to find him. He knocked on the door, and one of the Prophet, peace be upon him's companions, peeped through a chink to see Umar, sword in hand, looking very agitated. The companion rushed back into the house with alarming news. "What's the matter?" Hamza, may Allah be pleased with him, asked. "Umar is at the door," the companion reported. "Is that all?" exclaimed Hamza, may Allah be pleased with him. "If he comes in peace, fine. If not, we shall kill him with his own sword." Muhammad, peace be upon him, meanwhile, was in the midst of receiving a revelation from Allah, and upon completion of the revelation he came into the sitting room. There sat Umar. The Prophet, peace be upon him, caught him by his clothes and sword belt and said to him urgently, "Umar, will you not turn back from your path unless Allah Almighty sends down on you such chastisement as he did on Walid bin Mughira? O Allah, this is Umar bin Khattab. O Allah, bestow power and glory on Islam through this Umar bin Khattab." After the Prophet, peace be upon him, ended his supplication, Umar said, "I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship other than Allah, and you are the Prophet of Allah." Those present in the house cried, "Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest," so loudly that their cry resonated around the Kaaba. Jazakallah khair for listening.